Okay, good evening. Saturday evening, 9:20 here. This is the last recorded lecture for A11. We will have two more open classrooms this coming Wednesday and the Wednesday after that. That second Wednesday will be more of an open class, sort of segueing toward the final. So there won't be a lecture that week. Trying to give you some breathing room and some catch up time. Uh, so tonight's two movies, which I've posted for you under, I think, the announcements, is Un chien andalou, 1929, which would translate as the Andalusian dog. I don't know how much that helps, but that would be the translation. The other is called Meshes of the Afternoon. So on the one, it might seem odd that I'm featuring pieces from 1929 and 1943 this late, quote unquote, late into the class. But among the many myths we've deconstructed in this class, one of the dominant ones, certainly in the modern age, is the myth of linearity and causality, and that one thing can cause another, that there's a cause and an effect. Logic, in other words. And it's not that logic doesn't exist, it's that logic is in disrepute in terms of world affairs, especially as after World War I, which ended in 1919. By 1929, and this is the era that we tend to cover in A10, but I think I'm trying to deliberately break up chronological time. There have been masterpieces of presenting the chaos for what it is and not pretending it's something else. And Waiting for Godot has pride of place in this class for that. But it's not the first time it's attempted. It's probably the first time Godot sort of brought it into something like the literary mainstream. In 1929, first of all, cinema was well established. It was about to go to sound, which it would go to in 1930, 31. Hitchcock was already making movies in Germany. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Vertigo and the influence of probably both these movies on Vertigo. And by 1929, Hitler had written Mein Kampf. He went to jail in 1924 for a sort of fairly badly planned putsch, P-U-T-S-C-H, or a kind of coup of a small part of the government. He'd hoped that the rest of the government would follow him, and they didn't, and he was arrested. But it was the beginning of his popular rise, and in fact, going to jail and writing Mein Kampf was the best thing that could have happened to Hitler. He couldn't get arrested as a dog catcher before that, as a failed art student in Vienna. And all of a sudden, he had the eye of the public. And not unlike the insurrection at the Capitol, a kind of, doomed to fail, but sort of disturbingly symbolic disruption of the government order. Anyway, by 1929 as well, cinema had become a reliable form of entertainment, and it was no longer being explored as much as an art form. It was commercially successful. So to some degree, Salvador Dali and Luis Buñuel, Dali had already was beginning to make a name for himself as a painter. He never really self-identified as a surrealist, and yet his work is seen as seminal to surrealism. And as the concept suggests, surrealism is above realism, above and beyond realism. So the basic hook of surrealism, and we've seen it a lot in this class, it's just been running as more of a strand. But what's something that's avowedly surrealist, what it will try to do is present the unconscious world in the foreground and the conscious world in the background, and everything else does the opposite. So established movies were very good at presenting an illusion of reality by the way things were edited. And the central paradox of film is that it's you can give a better sense of reality by cutting up the film, by editing. So the illusion of plenitude and continuity is actually created by cutting, numerous cuts. And if you think of the shopping scene in Hitchcock's Vertigo, we're swept into his intensity by the fact that the film is actually cut up. It's not as though Hitchcock has this. He could have had a standing camera there. He wouldn't have had this anywhere near the same tension and involvement. So instead, he cuts to close-ups of her face looking more and more concerned, his face looking more and more determined. She jumps up and runs to the mirror, and we see her reflection and we see his reflection. There's actually four of them all of a sudden. And she's like, why are you doing this? It won't bring her back. Which isn't true, because this is exactly what will bring her back, but nothing can bring her back in the sense that she didn't exist, Madeline. So Vertigo itself, Stewart and Elster, Johnny, he comes off as a movie goer and Elster comes off as a director, and they have this kind of unholy alliance that splits Kim Novak's into both Judy and Madeline, but not in a binary way. Like the Madeline that she brings to life has Judy in it, and the Judy who no longer is performing Madeline, nonetheless, Johnny sees something in her. Most first-time viewers don't think this is the same actress, Kim Novak, but he gets it. He sees it immediately, and then attempts to draw it out. And so this theme that we've had this whole class of how do we present the chaos for what it is and not pretend that it's something else. Now, cinema came along at a crucial time where there was more and more difficulty keeping the self-construction integrated. There was the onslaught, I should say, of the urban environment, the beginnings of advertising commodification, the stumbling of science as a dominant discourse, the rise of capitalism and geopolitics as the new dominant discourse. All of this put enormous stress on experiencing oneself as continuous in space and time. In other words, as having an identity. And cinema, one reason it quickly became the dominant entertainment form is it was relatively cheap. So you could go see a movie for less than $1, whereas in theater was out of reach of the working class. So cinema was a working class medium, and for a while it was just kind of stigmatized. Theater people were either embarrassed or would refuse to act in film, not unlike the way movie stars don't always want to be on television, although that's changing with Netflix movies and Amazon movies, which are starting to have the same production values that traditional Hollywood movies might have. And the line or the blur between are you a TV star or a movie star is harder and harder to ascertain. So Un Chien Andalou was made, and to some degree is an angry manifesto, and surrealism itself was an angry manifesto. It said that the way we've been doing things brought us World War I, and it will bring us World War II, and yet nobody seems to see that. So Un Chien Andalou is about we've got to learn to see a different way, and one of the primary assaults here is to shift from linearity to juxtaposition. In other words, one next to one does not equal two. One and next to one creates something that's in neither image. And we talked about this with the Vertigo lectures. Montage is probably the dominant metaphorical structure of how 20th and 21st century artists attempt to change the way we see or break through. You'll see in both these films that I'm going to walk you through, there's a lot of eye imagery, and as there was in Vertigo, remember, and that famous ending where Judy says, "Would you help me with the necklace?" How has this thing work? Which takes us back to where he asked about the brassiere, which she's wearing again, the strapless brassiere, and she says, "Can't you see?" And of course he can't, and he hasn't. And in the first half of the movie, neither did we. So already in this mainstream surrealist movie, Hitchcock has um, told us that uh, what we think we see is only what we think we see. It's not all that there is to be seen, and it really gets tricky when you interpret, because then you get into confirmation bias, which a lot of you psych students would know about this. But as you see a pattern, you tend to more and more be biased toward anything that strengthens the pattern that you're trying to move forward with, and you'll be less and less observant of things that contradict it. And scientists have known this for a while, and they get concerned about double-blind studies and anonymous wanting people to not know whether they got the sugar pill or the pill that's being tested, because it's just going to get hopelessly confused. But there's a pushback in Godot and in other things that says that our refusal to look at our fear of death, our refusal to understand the limits of technology, that innovation is not wisdom. It may represent cleverness, intelligence, but not wisdom. And wisdom is still going to have to be sought in the recesses of linearity. So juxtaposition has better access to the unconscious than linearity, because linearity is in many ways is the trying to leave the unconscious behind, trying to build one thing on top of another. So Vladimir is very much trying to present linear. Have you heard of the Bible? What day is it? And so on. And Estragon just keeps knocking it back down to who knows what day it is. It might be Tuesday. Maybe he said he'd meet us here. Maybe he didn't. Until we get that angry retort from Vladimir. Nothing is certain when you're about. The reality is nothing is certain. Period. And Vladimir blames Estragon for introducing uncertainty into everything. But that's not even what Estragon's trying to do. Estragon's not a philosopher. He simply doesn't register pattern. Sort of persistently in the now, and Vladimir is anywhere but now. He tries to create the past again. He tries to talk about the future. But what he won't talk about is now, and Estragon won't talk about anything else. No, remember too that when Estragon falls asleep, Vladimir wakes him up in a panic, and Estragon says, "Why won't you let me sleep? Why won't you let me dream? And can I tell you my dream?" And Vladimir is horrified. No. So you can see that doubling down. And then in the balcony, we begin to see the gears shifting, that fantasy is getting more and more foregrounded by Genet, and saying, these politics that you think are so much about logic are actually being run by fantasy. And although we act like reality is real and fantasy isn't, the truth is there is no reality without fantasy. And to a certain degree, we need to fantasize to sustain a reality. And what typically we try to do, like the fantasy of law, that there's a legal system. I mean, obviously there is one, but the fantasy that it's fair, or that it simply is already structured, is not true. And law creates criminality in a sense. You can't have criminals without declaring things outside the law. And then the notion that a judge will then be beyond corruption doesn't work. And Genet even raises that disturbing issue of power being an effective relationship, and the seduction of power for the sake of power. But nobody is power. Nobody has it. Everybody positions themselves in such a way that they have the leverage to exert on others. When we get to Meshes of the Afternoon, you'll see the relationship to Sylvia Plath de Beljar. There'll be literally four, although it's the same actress, and she also directed it, Maya Deren. She will enter the same house four times, but it seems that it's actually four versions of her, each distinct from the other, that keeps entering the house, because when the fourth uh, the fourth time she enters the house, there are two versions of her sitting at the table, and the first version of her, which we saw sit down in a chair upstairs, is also still there. So now there's four Maya Derens in the same film, and then finally a man enters the picture, and that's when we start to see this um, rather Esther Greenwood-esque panic of how do you perform for the male gaze? How do you break away from the male gaze? How do you retain who you are, outside reference of the male gaze? And in chien, andalou, I think you'll see more strongly, but you'll see the Jack Gladney issue of feeling like an imposter, feeling like you're falling apart. But it'll be presented, the unconscious is presented as though it's what's happening. And then what's happening is impossible to figure out, because once you flip it and you film the unconscious, which is what these two movies essentially do, now you're trying to, or you might be trying to guess, like, what's Johnny's problem? What is Scotty's problem? Why does he keep pursuing and losing these women? And you get hints, but the unconscious is still in the background in Vertigo. Here, the actual meaning of anything is in the background, and so these are very dreamlike, these movies, but they're not even trying to say we're dreams. What they're trying to say is that the waking state and the dreaming state are inextricable, and mutually constitutive, and there are two strands of two different pieces of thread, and the only way we can weave reality is using the thread of the unconscious and the thread of the conscious, and then weaving together a self-construction that is immaterial. I've made this point before, that this blazer of mine looks like a blazer, but it's actually knotted wool, and with air and space in between the wool. And cinema is a weaving process. Editing is a weaving process, and it seems to be similar to the weaving process we use to create modern self-identity, and that has been the love-hate relationship of cinema and moviegoers ever since. And the more talented directors like to play with that tension of how cinema can stitch you in, it can suture you into a character position, but it can also, not unlike The Judge and the Thief, cinema can taunt you with, like, what if I refuse? As a movie, what if I refuse to, quote, make sense? What if I refuse to make sure you always have establishing shots so that you know where you are? Why do you think you know where you are? In these two movies, it makes it pretty clear that you're never more lost than when you think you know where you are. And by 1929, people knew how to read movies in a way. You have an establishing shot. If you show a shot of a house and then you show the inside of a house, you've just gone into the house that you've shown the shot of. You'll see these rules, every rule of cinema that you probably didn't even know that you knew, being systematically violated in both of these movies, to the point where you really cannot go into these movies expecting any more than you could with Godot. These movies are about how we weave together our self-identity. So there is no way to identify. Every attempt you make to identify, and the movie will encourage you to do that, will immediately be unknotted. So I think it was this class I mentioned that, but who knows? If you have a piece of string and you make a knot, so here's it's a rubber band, but we'll say it's a piece of string, and then you can. This is similar to, think of the rubber band as reality, and think of this knot as your identity, and it looks substantial and it looks separate from the rubber band, but it's a knot. It's the same. It's the reality is continuous. It's just that you've knotted it a particular way, which means if you unknot it, you're back to this. So Johnny's nervous breakdown is going from that knot, that bridge, back to this seamless line. And so film also tries to, it starts with a line like this, and then it gives you, a character. And I can't, not good enough. Can't do this quickly enough. But and it might even give you a series of knots. It gives you, and then you have a sense that there's a cause and effect between and among these knots. But it's all the same rubber band. And ideology is what teaches you how to knot the seamless continuity of the real into your version of reality. And it used to be thought that ideology was false, but actually we've learned that it's a necessary fiction. That um, and Jack is struggling to hide behind his knot that he's the head of the Hitler group, and Esther Greenwood is also struggling with the number of knots she's being expected to tie, and then choose among one of the knots or one of the figs. So I'm going to try and shift. I'm going to try and share my screen now, and I hope this works. Let's see. So share content, share application screen, Chrome tab. And so, okay, so I think that I am sharing, and I'll go to full screen in a minute, but I should be sharing the screen so that you see a man by a door who is sharpening a razor. So this is the opening shot of Un Chien Andalou. So that's a sharpening strap that he's using to sharpen a straight razor, presumably that he's shaving. So he's resting it against the doorknob, and but this image is loaded right from the start. If you look at the man's watch, it's a circle, and there'll be more watches in this movie, but there'll also be circles. Is what Dali and Buñuel try to do here is they don't go from shot to shot to build an illusion of reality. They go from shape to shape. So you see the razor being held across the strap that is sharpening it, and that. Then it's not unlike the opening shot of Vertigo, where you have an iron bar that bisects the screen. So the beginnings of us wondering what we're watching. But this is a movie about how we watch movies, and it's going to both draw us into. It's going to show us that it knows how we watch movies, and it's also going to cut open the imaginary plenitude that we're used to allowing movies to build for us. So this is also a movie about cutting, because editing is a cut. And then we cut to a horse running, or we cut to a house burning. And every time we cut, there's a necessity to ask ourselves, what do these two cuts have to do one with the other? So, but in some ways, we are the space between the cut in both these movies. That we're neither the first shot or the second shot. We're the space in between the two shots, partly because we're the ones who react to the two shots, and partly because this movie is trying to present the chaos for what it is and not pretend it's something else, like an adventure story or a love story. So let's push forward just a little bit. Okay, so this is the next, and the Wagner, the music in the background just plays the whole movie, and it flattens out the concept of how a soundtrack might draw your attention. So you'll find yourself at times trying to match images to where the song is, but then after a while you realize that the song is playing in a way that seems to be blind to the movie you're watching. So the soundtrack is there, but it's not helping. And you'll also get markers like Once Upon a Time, early in the spring, 2 months later. These don't hold up. You think, okay, 2 months later, and we're used to thinking about that, like, okay, so now they're older. These title cards don't help. Time doesn't seem to be consistent at all, and space isn't consistent. The basic rule of cinema that if somebody opens a door and walks through it, he's then in the next room, will get violated. The guy will open the door in this movie, step out over the threshold, and fall into a meadow. And this will be done a couple of different times. To give you something to hold on to, and where this movie is kind of a prototype to Vertigo, is this is a prologue. This guy's not even going to be the main character. What we're seeing here in the first 2 minutes is like this movie is it's going to try and cut open the way you see, which is why it will end in one of the most famous, if not infamous, moments in film, where it would, through the editing, suggest that a woman's eye is cut right. The eyeball itself is cut through the middle by this straight razor. And in reality, it was a donkey's eye that from a dead donkey they got from a meat market. So it's a special effect, and it's not even super realistic like the goriest films, but it just shows you how shocking the editing can be. It's hard to get out of your head that somebody's just had their eyeball sliced, and we see some of the aqueous liquid coming out of the because it is an actual biological eye that is slit and not from a live animal. And stuff spills out of the slit eye, and this seems to be, and that's the prologue. Then we start the movie over, but we've already been kind of warned that this movie is going to cut open the way we see movies. So now you can see the cigarette, and you can also see the lace curtains on the window, and lace comes up a lot in this movie and in Meshes of the Afternoon, meshes also being a kind of lace. There's a kind of obsession with things that are woven together, but they're typically in the background. So this could be reality back here, and this is the unconscious that normally makes this reality capable of being mistaken for reality. But in this movie, you're not going to get that help. The foregrounding is it's flipped. It's the unconscious. And remember, something we've said this whole course is that we've flipped existence in essence. Instead of presuming an essence from which an existence emerges, we've said since Godot that there is this panic that we find ourselves existing and then have to fabricate or weave an essence. And that's, of course, what Vladimir and Esteban are struggling to do, and what they assume Godot would make possible for them to do, to give them an origin by giving them a purpose, and kind of doing both. And we've talked about how in your lives, something like the grade point average is a weaving together of something that makes sense of the schooling you had before you came to university, makes sense of the schooling that you hope to have after university, and also seems to be tied into practical matters of career, money, relationships, quote unquote, quality of life, and so on. So it's it's what the French call a point de capiton. If you've ever seen these couches that have buttons in them, and the buttons don't have any purpose other than to suggest a shape of the couch. But in fact, the buttons, it's like the knot in the rubber band. The couch is still an amorphous blob, and the buttons just give it contours, seem to make it into a real object. But the unreality of the couch is still there. If the buttons were all to be taken out, it would then be an indistinguishable mass, and not identifiable as a couch any more than what I'm wearing is identifiable as a blazer. So he's smoking the cigarette, and the cigarette, of course, creates smoke, and you can see a little bit of it here. So far we've had the razor, we've had the circle of the watch, and now we have smoke, and then we have the lace, the weaving. And in these two movies, you really got to pay attention to objects for their own sake, not objects that are made symbolic of other things, because symbolizing is also something that is taken apart in these movies. Any attempt to see something as a symbol will be disallowed, particularly with Meshes of the Afternoon, which you'll see if you pay specific attention to a bread knife, a telephone, a phonograph, a key, a puppy, a large flower. And on the one hand, you struggle to see what the symbolic significance of these things are as they move through the movie, but they keep moving around for reasons that don't make sense. The telephone's on the stairs, the telephone's already in the bedroom, the poppy's on the sidewalk, the poppy's on her pillow. So it almost, again, the way it's not unlike Beckett, it can mock you a little bit. That it's like, oh, the flower represents her virginity or her womanhood or her love of a man, or and it's like, no, that's you. That's you doing all of these things. That's not built into the structure of the movie. This movie is refusing to be a mirror to the illusion of our own coherence. So we go back to the razor. And notice he measures it against his thumb. So now the watch has been a circle. The thumb has been a circle. The razor has been laid across the razor strap in a perpendicular manner. And this will matter as we get the first point of view shot of the movie. So he has seen that, and now he's standing before the full lace curtain with even more curtains. So he's still smoking, and now he looks up. And there's the moon. It's a full moon tonight, by the way. And just as I was coming over here to give the lecture, I looked up, and it was a full moon, and then you're going to see this cloud come over here and cut the moon. And I literally saw that walking down the street to come over here to record this. So now this parallel editing is normally parallel editing is used to forward the plot, but here's a woman staring straight ahead, and we can tell by the tie that this seems to be that same guy that we saw before. But watch him open the eye, and the emphasis will be on the fact that her eye is a circle, the moon is a circle, the watch is a circle, his thumb is a circle, but it's the razor that's going to cut across. And the razor, like the iron bar in Vertigo, is the introduction of symbolism, language, the symbolic order. But another way to say that the unconscious is foregrounded and the reality is backgrounded is to say that the imaginary is foregrounded and the symbolic has lost its dominance, so that impossible things are happening. Where did this woman come from? Why is she sitting there? Why does she allow her eye to be open? None of those questions matter, because this is the way the imagination, the way the imaginary can jump and juxtapose things without any regard for logic. And dreams, of course, do that all the time. And then we like to downgrade dreams as being sort of just a dream. But dreams are just as salient as our reality and indistinguishable from the maintenance of it. So the first cut is back to the moon, and we see the cloud that we saw, the smoke, the cloud of his cigarette smoke, which arguably could have gone up to be the cloud that bisects the moon. And then there's a certain weird inevitability that the razor will have to bisect the circularity of the eye. So, and then we 8 months later, which doesn't make any sense. That doesn't help. In fact, we don't see the man again with the razor blade, and arguably he's a stand-in for the director, not a kind of a Gavin Elster, but he's Gavin Elster that instead of catering to your eye, he's going to, metaphorically speaking, cut our eye open and force us to see anew through the apparatus of cinema, the apparatus of ourselves. So we have a man bicycling down the street, and once again we're going to have to look at patterns here. There's an odd, unexplained feminization of sorts. He's wearing something like a woman's hat, and then this thing about this shoulder outfit that it seems a vague echo of woman's fashion. So gender, which is another binary, masculine, feminine, and we've talked about that in this class. Uh, he seems to be a composite of, but at least in terms of clothing, he's neither dressed as a man or a woman. He's dressed as something, and it's not like he's a transvestite or bisexual. It's more that this draws attention to how we usually keep these kinds of clothing separate. I mean, you could be a man and wear a dress, and you could be a woman, obviously, and wear a suit. But what's a little more unusual is to simply wear both clothing associated with a woman and a man in the same outfit. And then these lines are going to sort of become important again. And this box, uh, the way we look for patterns in order to create a box where we can store things that mementos, memories of the day. But even the way this is done, there's already some assumption that we've manufactured these items that are going into our memory box. So this is from the back. You can see again a continuation of it's a dress, but it's also a man's suit. It seems to be a woman's hat and a woman's shoulder garment. And here is an interesting double exposure. Is what's the relationship between this person as a discrete entity and his environment? And the implication of this shot is that the clothes and the environment are what create the person. Because notice the person, he's not there. What's being featured is, I mean, if you look, you can sort of see his hand here, but they managed to shoot, because what they did is they shot the street, and then they put this image on, but they kept the street part there, so he's now the invisible man. And Rene Magritte has several paintings that also kind of put this together, that we are what we wear, we are what the environment instructs us to be. But like that famous opening scene in American Psycho, where Christian Bale said, "You see me, but I'm just not here." It's a close-up of the box. So now we go into an interior. Now, so that using the box as the segue, that last shot of the box, I think, is important to have just before you go inside a box. This is a room, and again, we've got the curtains, all those curtains kind of in the background. And here's a woman sitting, her foot on a pillow. The room is nicely appointed and sort of buffered from the street. Now, this again kind of defies cinema laws, because when someone looks up that startled, we expect a counter shot of what did they see. And it can't be him, not in any literal sense, but actually on some psychic level, she seems to have some awareness of him as this other person that is coming near. And she throws the book on the table, and it falls open to a very famous painting by Paul Vermeer called The Lace Maker. So not just the windows, but this is actually a woman leaning forward and weaving a delicate piece of lace. So something will bring her to the window. And she's very, very startled to see him. And now we're going to see the effect that her gaze has on him, even though he doesn't look up and see her. So typically in a movie, there would be a shot counter shot people would see each other first, and then that would have an effect on them. But this is a psychic effect. This is, in some ways, what we're getting is the unconscious of a romantic attraction, that they and it won't, instead of it being controlled by shot counter shot, it's going to be more like the psychic force fields. So how did she know she was coming? We don't know. Why does he fall over as he starts to go past her gaze? And did she anticipate that? No, not necessarily. I think she thought it might occur, and it's almost like if he falls down, then something will have some thought I had will be confirmed. Now one can easily think of Johnny and from Vertigo who falls, and women are falling. So this whole issue with height, with falling in love, seeing him fall over attracts her, but that also indicates that the relationship is beginning on a somewhat treacherous path. That had he ridden by, presumably, and did not fall over with her gaze, she would not have rushed down to rescue him, as we see. And he looks helpless. Notice this seems to be the second time she's come out of the building, which is also not really possible. And these doors are painted, not and almost in a manner that would draw attention to that. And now she seems quite solicitous. It's worth noting that when she looked out the window at first, she seemed angry and like, I don't want to do this. I don't want this to happen. And now that he's lying there helpless, she's anxious to approach. And something about his falling over has activated her sense of her role, which is to save him, to prop him up. And remember, Judy fell in love with Scotty because he was broken. He'd fallen or nearly fallen. And so while pretending to be Madeline, this is more like Judy, drawn towards Scotty's helplessness, not least of all because Scotty denies the helplessness so much, and keeps saying he's independent and so on. So the physical affection, it's safe in a way that as long as he's fallen down and needs her to get up, that keeps her confident in her own role. But notice what we'll see happening as one could, after several dates, if you will, although time doesn't mean anything in the movie, they each start to draw away from the other person's gender performance. Now she's holding the box, and what she finds in the box, let's just see. So she finds a tie, which is both phallic and emblematic of the man, and also is reminiscent of the tie of the man with the razor that we saw in the opening. So this box seems to be a shared focal point between the two. They see different people put different things in the box and then take different things out of the box. And sometimes one person will put something in the box and someone else will open it and there's something else in the box, not what was put in it, and they take it out. So you seem to find in the box, well, you put in the box whatever you think you need to put in the box, and then you tend to find in the box whatever you need to take out of the box. So the box is a visual equivalent of desire, of what we think we want, and our capacity to misrecognize object after object box that we can put into this box of our desire, and then we open up the box again and it's something else. And this remember, the double exposure shot Here she's laying out the clothing of the man, but his body's not there, and yet that seems to be how she how she experiences him, in terms of again of the clothing, which she's also controlling and arranging, which may in some ways puts her in the Scotty position briefly of Scotty, why are you doing this? I know it looks good on you, that's all. Now, this seems, in a way, this almost seems like an act of will. This is something like a female gaze, which you very rarely see in mainstream cinema. What is the woman looking at, as opposed to the woman being the person who is being looked at? Now, she's looking at the bed and seems to be waiting for him to uh, do. She seems to think that he's on the bed. In fact, only the clothes are on the bed, and then she is surprised and turns and sees him over here, except he's staring at the palm of his hand, and he doesn't fit into the frame of her gaze, and the excess of himself. He doesn't know what to do with because he wants to be the object of her desire. So in this, ingenious visual shot, we see this excess in him being leaving him in the form of ants. And she seems rather watchful here and almost in offering reward, like don't be in excess of of the way I'm comfortable framing you. Notice the similarity to the Vertigo soundtrack. Na 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 na, and it's very romantic music, but the romance is already teetering. And now we're going to do a fade out from the ants, the circle in his hand that the ants are coming out of, to a woman's the woman's armpit hair, and possibly her. Again, we're following similarity in visual patterning and not plot. And then it changes into a barnacle on the sand. Now we have a round circle, and there's another character standing above a severed hand. Now remember, we just saw his hand with the ants coming out. This character also has often been described as hermaphroditic looking, but where the physical features, it's hard to tell if she's, quote, a woman or a man. And notice we're dealing with cutting again, the cutting of the eye, the hole in the hand, the cutting of the hand, part of which suggests that the way we view and experience our bodies as coherent is also fundamentally under tension. The children's song, your knee bone's connected to your thigh bone's connected to your hip bone. These are songs we sing to children to help them coordinate their the fiction of their body construct. I mean, and nothing's connected to anything else. I mean, we think of the knee as a joint, the hip as a joint. The organs are discrete, heart, liver, kidney. So we talk about the body that way, and that allows us to choreograph the body. But in fact, we don't experience the body as when we're born, at least. It's very inchoate to us, and we're taught how to have a coherent sense of our body. But in fact, that doesn't always go so well, as anybody knows who's fat shamed or falls into all the different demands of cosmetics and bras and clothing. That your body is a battleground in this, and for competing discourses, and partly because it isn't the singular entity that the myth allows us to construct. So there's another circle, and this forms around her. So we're still working with the hole in the man's hand, and we seem to be building out from it. How does that affect the way you feel when you're in a crowd, when part of you is missing or part of you is severed? And now the policeman is trying to push the crowd back so that this woman or man or womanly man is able to prod the hand with a stick. It's worth noting that it seems like all the people in the circle are men, and they're very upset. And this, certainly in Freudian terms, this would relate to castration anxiety, which is not so much the concern like Roger of like literally castrating yourself, but more like feeling cut off, feeling helpless, feeling your agency cut away from your action. So the gaze of the crowd seems to shift a little here. They go from being very anxious to figure out what the hand is to basically assigning the hand to this person. So this is, in some ways, a parody of the remains of a soldier being returned to their widow or their fiance. I mean, men were blown up in World War I. 1/3 of the men in France between the ages of 18 and 25 died in World War I, and were returned, if at all, badly maimed. And many who survived had lost their hands, lost their arms, lost their legs. This was still very literally fresh and would have been visible in Paris every day. Men on crutches, men with one arm, and so on. So there's a slight historical, but notice the box has completely changed its use. But there was something about the machinery of World War I that just churned up bodies, tore them apart. Mostly the men, of course, in the trenches, and it kind of eviscerated a sense of that part of being a man is having the courage and the will and the skill to fight well, none of which makes any difference when you're cut down by machine gun fire or aerial bombs. The use of the window framing is very cinematic. They're each on their own screen, and they're clearly, they're both watching the scene, but they're having quite a different reaction to it. He's going into a sort of a spasm of desire, some of it physical, a kind of partly seems to come across as a desperate turn to her for sexual satisfaction, which she's completely not in tune with. That's not what this scene is doing for her at all. This dissipation of the crowd is choreographed almost in a sense of a busy urban day ending. And who are you at the end of the day, alone or out of the bustle of the corner of Bloor and Young? So now she's standing in the middle of the street, and he's looking on with definitely with a physical, feverish, seems somewhat eroticized gaze. And he looks at her, and he wants her to notice. Now the car is going right toward her, and uh, here's where the movie gets. We feel like it's the unconscious again. Like this, in literal terms, it seems to be a car coming down the road straight at this woman, this manly woman, this womanly man, or is it the mounting physical desire of the man in the window that is actualizing the scene? This scene is almost copied by Hitchcock in Vertigo, except it's the policeman who falls from a great height, and then later Madeline, and then we see from that height people coming forward. Now the erotic gaze is pretty unmistakable on his part, and she seems to be noticing it with mounting apprehension. So again, the imaginary obviously is foregrounded. He wants to fondle her. He wants her to be naked. She's neither is what she wants, or even appears to be what she's doing. But then through the force of his own imaginary and it happens, quote unquote, and that's the way this movie works over and over again. What people want happens, and what happens if it's nothing can happen except when it's what people want, which is a little like the dynamic in The Balcony, whether we realize it or not. Is it so much of what we take to be power is simply a configuration of our own desire. I just also a sexual act. It's quite self-involved. I mean, he's not looking at her. His eyes are turned up. There's a bit of drool coming out, and she, at best, feels like well, objectified, to say the least. And the imaginary again, the way the body can shift around. Like suddenly, she's facing the wall, and his hands are on her buttocks, which is the other thing that he wants to fondle. So now she's fleeing the next act. Grabs the tennis racket as a weapon, and he suddenly gets a different idea. So if this is a romance, so to speak, and he's pushing for sex, at the very least prematurely, and she's saying stop, he suddenly has an idea of how to uh, effectively approach her sexually, and it's sublimation. We're going to watch him do a very strange harness himself up. Like I'll impress you with several different things. So watch what happens. So he realizes, I've got no choice. You're very angry. You're very unapproachable. I have an idea. So he harnesses himself. And the first thing that it seems to, the first part of it seems to be the Ten Commandments, the stone tablets of Moses. So so the first thing he's dragging in this chain of things is morality, marrying, really, like not raping her, but wanting sex within the accepted boundaries of marriage. And the next several things he's dragging, you're going to see a better shot of this in a minute, but there's two bishops. So you have the Ten Commandments, then you have the members of the church. You have two pianos, culture, two dead donkeys, labor. So he's dragging, taking on in harness. This is the entire apparatus of marriage and work, and the power of the church comes partly from legislating sexuality, and you don't usually see such a shocking juxtaposition of culture and labor, but in fact, labor, and the dead donkeys, implies that the labor is going to be exploited, so that the piano, those from Heart of Darkness will remember Conrad doing something similar. So the hand is caught in the door, and we have go back to that previous image of the excess, the ants coming out. Yeah, we don't know what happened after this, but this almost seems after a big fight. He seems to have accepted his position, placing himself among the clothing that had been laid out on the bed in the earlier scene. Another meaningless title card. Now an angry father figure is coming up the steps. So it would appear that the suitor is once again trying to deny and ignore and place himself within the frame of her gaze. And but it won't last long because the rage of the father is coming in to tear away the feminized clothes. The martini being shaken, perhaps a reminder of childhood. And you can see he pays no attention to the woman. He just strides forward. And something that this doesn't seem to be an open bedroom as it was before. It seems to be a child's room. So this may well be a recollection of a child of his angry father demanding that he be a man. Now, for the first time, he's actually dressed unambiguously as a man. Although he tries to save that last little scrap. Father figure takes that too. It looks a little like a noose. Now he goes to stand in the corner like a naughty boy. He notices next to the tennis racket. And the father continues to abuse him. Tells him to keep his arms out. Another time frame doesn't mean anything. Now the father figure seems to have been replaced by his alter ego. This is a doppelganger shot. That's a school desk, kind of thing you'd find in a schoolhouse for fifth, sixth graders. So we're still dealing with childhood echoes. And it's unclear. He's handing him books, almost as though he's growing up and he's going to get an education. But look what happens to the books. They turn into revolvers. So this could partially be the angry child finally confronting the patriarchal father, who seems oddly, well, more angelic in this scene. But this killing of the father will be another attempt to solidify a masculine role playing. Falls into the field against the back of a woman in pearls. He then disappears, and some men will come to carry him away. And we're kind of seeing a repeat shot of the crowd gathering back to go to the womanly man after she was run over by the car. And that shot right there looked like a father and a son taking a walk. They seem anxious that the father and son look at the dead father, and then they seem rather cavalier about it. He just waves his hand, carry him off. It's another image of male collapse, masculine collapse, not unlike what we've seen in Vertigo. These are all men. Only about 3 minutes left, so I'll let this run out. So this, back to their relationship. Sees a moth on the wall. And it seems the death head on the moth. That's something scene you see from The Matrix. That something's happened, and when he takes his hand away, his mouth is gone. And she starts putting on her lipstick aggressively. This is kind of the final turn of their gender merging and the battle for supremacy. Now his face is being covered by by hair. And she looks at her own underarm to realize that her underarm hair is now covering his mouth, which had disappeared a minute ago, which she reacted to by vigorously applying lipstick. So this is what I talk about, that mutually constitutive performance of playing at being feminine to permit the masculine. But she is kind of withdrawing her performance. He hasn't really he hasn't become what she wanted her performance to design, and he has, although initially attracted, has felt consistently castrated by the frame that she's put upon him. So it's essentially the breakup of a relationship, but it's done again with the unconscious, like whose hair is, all the body parts are getting displaced one upon the other. So he's still there with it. And then she sticks out her tongue very vigorously, the final, which is somewhat another, probably a deliberate mixing of gender, because it winds up looking like she's presenting the phallic object to him. And of course, she steps outside the door, and she's on a beach, and here is another man. And there's some suggestion that her phobia of death may have also driven her out of the relationship, because she wants a new relationship, a new man, a new romance. again, she's enamored of him. He looks away and just presents her with his watch. Now that goes all the way back to the first scene, but it also, it's, as I said, this is the unconscious. So that even as she meets this new man, he does present, the first thing he does is turn away from her and show her that time is continuing on, that this isn't forestalling her mortality. She doesn't want that. And now she initiates the kiss that she withheld to such a degree with the other man. Walking down the beach, and this might somehow appear to be the end scene of a Hollywood romance. So to some degree, this is a sense of partnership, helping each other over the rocks and over this. So it appears to be we're going to somehow end on upbeat, and this is Diane Boonwell's final kind of whacking ahead of the genre movies that were beginning to take over all of cinema, because this scene will also be undercut, and I emphasize the word cut. So they come upon the smash box, and again the womanly attire that keeps showing up again, the stuff that the father figures threw out the window. But this is the first time we've seen the box busted. So she's anxious to move on, and you get the feeling that she's hoping, it's almost like a Judy moment where she's hoping he doesn't notice that there was another man, and that box is broken, and he tosses it away as though that's got nothing to do with me, and she's like, no, it doesn't. But you also get the feeling that this is getting set up to be a repeat of what we see in Vertigo. And it's in the spring, which doesn't make any sense. The final image of the movie is both a woman and presumably this man. It seemed dead and pinned into the sand. So the final shot of the movie, running against the entire attempt of the romance genre to create a false resolution of hyper complementarity among the man and the woman. And it seems to return yet again relentlessly to the thing that's so rarely in mainstream films, and that is the way that mortality is affecting everything in our lives, no matter how much we are using our lives to distance ourselves from it. So I'm going to come back to me just for a second, and then. Okay, here I am. And now we're going to go to Meshes of the Afternoon. And I may, in the interest of time, I may not run it's only 14 minutes, but I just want to show you a couple of things about it. So, okay, so now I'll go back to share application screen. I want to share the Chrome tab. Okay, so now hopefully There's the opening shot of Meshes of the Afternoon. A hand, an arm rather, with a poppy. And if you look closely, the arm is a mannequin, comes down and places a poppy on the sidewalk, and then the arm disappears. To some degree, that opening shot is a little bit like something we've been talking about. We find ourselves born into a world of symbolism, armed only with the imaginary, and then we have to go through the process of trying to incorporate the symbolic in such a way that it at least brings about part of our imaginary, even though our imaginary is always threatening to pull apart the symbolic. If you'll notice, that shot of the way that was placed is not unlike, say, an arm reaching down into a crib to give a rattle or a toy or a flower to a baby. And then a woman appears first as shadow to pick up the flower that was placed there. And she's walking with it. It continues in shadow. And somebody's disappearing around the far corner. Now, the subtitle of it is Hollywood, 1943. So we are, this is again a movie that's very conscious of the golden age of Hollywood. And instead of pursuing the man who rounded the corner or whoever that was, she goes up the steps. And this is her first approach to the house, knocks on the door. We still haven't seen her. Now she's going to reach into her purse. This will be the first appearance of the key, which she drops. And it tumbles down the stairs. And she follows it, retrieves it. Steps into the house and does a pan. Now, this is a very ordinary California bungalow. And it seems to have, sort of the things we'd expect in a lived-in house. Newspapers on the floor. A picture, curtains, mantelpiece. There's a quick cut to the table, a teacup, a bread knife. Now that's the first sort of odd behavior of the objects in the movie. The bread knife falling out of the sliced bread. So once again, we're dealing with cuts. The knife that was cutting the bread is now fallen out, and the bread is not sliced bread. Is not sliced bread. It's bread that's been sliced, and that's same with the editing of a movie. And there's a telephone on the stairs, if you guys know what an old-fashioned telephone is, that's off the hook, so that anybody who called the number would be a busy signal. And she goes up the stairs, first time. The stairs may be the single most important architectural structure in the movie. Somehow going upstairs, trying to get from one level to the next level. She'll do this at least 4 times, and in varying degrees of difficulty. So the stairs will be a constant, kind of like a chandelier in the balcony. That seems to be the same chandelier no matter which scene is being played out in front of it. And you've got the lace again, the black lace blowing. This is obviously a bedroom. And there's a phonograph. There's another scene of the hand reaching in, and this seems to be a visual equivalent of subjectivity. I mean, we know we're literally seeing through her eyes, and that's why we haven't seen her face yet. Is that she can't see her face, so we're only seeing what she can see. And she takes the needle off, looks back downstairs, comes to a chair, This is clearly, we're seeing through her eyes. She sits in the chair with the puppy. Now we get an extreme close-up of her eye, which is the first shot we have of her face, and the eyes closing in what would appear to be emblematic of falling asleep, and we see the veil come across the window. So that theoretically what follows is a dream, and the music seems to come coming back through the tunnel, and we see this mysterious figure. We saw something earlier turning a corner, and this is a longer shot. And eerily enough, when the figure also is holding flowers, but when it turns, its face is a mirror. And it, there's no way to. My own take on this is a kind of a maternal figure, and whereas in Chien we saw the angry father figure, this time we seem to have a mother figure who the Maya Deren. I mean, this is Maya Deren who also directed it in the chair. A kind of shock that she wants some guidance from her mother on how to be a woman, but what all that her mother seemed able to reflect back to her was her own reflection and the need to worry about how she looked relative to the male gaze. And here she is, trying to follow the figure and running after it. And it seems in what almost a horror movie shot, can't pass the stairs, and the stairs lead up to the domestic space with the bread and the knife. So this is an Esther Greenwood moment of it's a nightmare where she's running after her mother figure to figure out who am I and what am I, and the mother keeps disappearing around the corner, and then there seems to be some kind of invisible wall that requires her to go up the steps. Now this would appear to be the first woman, Maya Deren, doing repeating what we saw before. But in fact, because we're going to see the Maya Deren that was in the chair from when this woman is in the house, this is really what we'd have to call Maya 2, and then there would be Maya 3, and then there will be Maya 4, and then there will be 4 Mayas in the house. So on the one hand, it seems repetitive, and it kind of is, but it's like she has sent 4 different iterations of herself through the same pattern, and they go up the steps differently, and their relationship to the key is different, and to the bread knife. And finally, that's the first shot we have of Maya Deren, the actress director. So this is already different because the first Maya came in, we had a shot of the feet, and the first Maya seemed to be pure subjectivity. This Maya seems to have a little more capacity to, well, has a gaze that we're allowed to see as a shot, counter shot. Now that's very similar, this panning motion, except the telephone's not there anymore. There's only the bread knife, and it's on the bottom step. So Maya 2, Maya 1 sees a phone that's off the hook. And if it's possible that that's a younger version of Maya trying to get in touch with herself. This Maya seems to have there's a sense of threat somehow, both, this weapon that could be used against her or that she could pick up and use herself. So this seems to set up a different relationship to the staircase. And this movie is brilliant at translating mood into vision. So because you could argue that how are any of these things actually happening? Well, they're happening in terms of mood, not in terms of what objects normally do. So interestingly, she doesn't pick up the knife. And no, notice how she does the stairs. It's in a sort of dream slow motion. She's making her way up the stairs, but it's presented as a kind of endless staircase, actually. I mean, these stairs seem 10 times longer than from Maya 1. And she gets to the first landing. And now she has a different relationship to the lace. Remember, before, in fact, she seems to have come through the window now, which is not when she was just at the top of the stairs. So spatially, this doesn't make any sense. Now the telephone's on her pillow, and the bread knife is suddenly up there too. And now, for the first time, she sees her own face reflected in the blade. She seems concerned. She hangs up the phone right away and kind of falls backward toward the window. And she's leaning out over the stairs. Which also doesn't quite make sense spatially. Like, which stairs are these? They seem one shot to the outside stairs, the other shot to the inside stairs. It looks an awful lot like the shots at the end of Vertigo, where they're at the top of the steeple and Judy falls through this arch and Scotty goes to the edge of it to look down. The living room again. But then she sees Maya 1, who's in the chair. And the needle's back on the phonograph. She does the same thing. She's very anxious to get this needle off the record. Now I know you guys probably don't, maybe you do know something about phonographs because they have made a comeback, but people talk about records a lot, like stuck in a groove or you sound like a broken record. It seems to be trying to interrupt the soundtrack of her own life, of which also is, to me, is reminiscent of Esther, trying to get rid of these voices in her head of her mother telling her what to do, and Mrs. Willard telling her what to do, and JC, the editor, telling her what to do. Too many phonograph records playing in your head. She also turns off the phonograph, which I don't believe was done with Maya 1. So this may suggest that she's inside her own dream. And here's the mirror figure again with the poppy. And then she sees herself, or perhaps Maya 3, chasing the mirrored mother figure. And that shot just saw, it's a kind of a beautiful shot that you often refer to as the Botticelli, where she appears to be a painting. So Maya, she's Maya 2 or 3. The key is no longer in her purse. It's in her. It comes out of her mouth. And so this is really Maya 3 coming in the door, again, rather differently. And then, of course, the key, it's not dropped, it doesn't fall down the stairs. So people tend to say this is repetitive, like Godot, but it isn't. Different things are happening to these different iterations of the 4 Mayas. And in some ways, if the first one was looking for the key in her purse and then she dropped it, there's a kind of a lack of confidence there. Now she's trying to actually, a key is something that opens something that would otherwise remain closed. And it seems that this Maya, Maya number 3, is trying to figure out who she is and not use a key that has been fashioned by somebody else. Yet the panning motion yet again, except now the mother figure is in the house and heading toward the staircase with the poppy. And the other difference is that there's an intense breeze. And now, not unlike vertigo, she's not going to be able to get up the steps. She's rocking back and forth. The other figure had already just done that. It just seems to be, he's really anxious to reach this figure. But now the stairs seem absolutely impossible, much like vertigo. She's trying to pull herself into the frame. And now the mother figure puts the poppy on the bed. So it's not the phone. It's not the knife. And the poppy seems something like the objet and the thing that makes objects desirable, not the objects themselves. But again, that mirrored face as mirror. Seems like she's trying to breathe. And then disappears. And the disappearance of her seems to push her up and down the stairs in these static, frozen, dissociated positions. And now the knife is there again. And there's Maya 1 still in the chair, or possibly Maya 2, if Maya 1 has disappeared. And now she's, as Maya 3, she's watching the figure and herself. And then perhaps Maya 4. Yeah, so that introduces Maya 4. And the key comes out of the mouth again. But the key becomes a knife. Remember in On Chien when the books became guns? And now Maya 4 has the knife, and Maya 2 and 3 are sitting at the table. She puts the knife there. The knife turns into a key. And Maya 2 and 3 and 4, they're all going to try and pick up the key. So there's you remember how Esther would sort of fractured into Doreen and Betsy and so these multiple women, and if they could all pick up, if they could all have the same key, it could bring the personality together. So they reach for it. Now she's holding it, but then it's suddenly back again. You can pick up the key, but you can't seem to bring it. They each will try. Now they're looking at her. She picks it up and her hand is black, and the key turns into a knife again, which alarms all of them. And Maya 1 is looking like she's having a nightmare. And Maya 4 now has these goggle eyes and is gigantic and is walking outside along the beach. And with each step, it's a different landscape. It's beach, it's meadow, it's sidewalk, it's rug. And as she approaches Maya 1, and the knife seems to go into her throat. I mean, it's kind of a special effect. And suddenly there's a man there. And he's inviting her to get up. Now, why is Maya 4 trying to kill Maya 1? And again, one thinks of Esther going over to Joan with the blood in her shoe and showing her she'd lost her virginity. And the next thing we hear, Joan has hung herself. So there's some idea of maybe Maya 1 has to be killed by Maya 4 if Maya 4 is going to break free, because Maya 1 right now seems to have kind of regressed into the object of desire of the man. And he seems to kind of in control of the domestic space. He has the poppy. Is he to some degree the man that her mother told her to marry? I mean, just to oversimplify it. He hangs up the phone so that everything is in order so they can be called. And then he heads up the stairs. And she looks back where where she'd seen the three Mayas had sat, and noticed it seems organized again. It's as if we're back in real time now. Like all those other Mayas are no longer there, and this is her with those iterations of the Mayas in her, following him up the stairs. So he's exactly in the position of the mirror face, the mother figure from before, which does seem to suggest, as we get a bit of this with Esther, whether it's a daddy or a mother, but that reincarnation of the childhood relationship of child and parent to grown up woman and lover. Notice she doesn't have very much trouble climbing the stairs. It's almost like Scotty cured of her vertigo. As long as she accepts the role that he seems to be dictating, and he seems unaware of and perhaps uninterested in the other Mayas. Finally, we get the mirror again, except it's his face in the mirror. Now she lies down next to the poppy, and which is an image of femininity, an image of being a woman. She does seem to be not unlike the guy who in Unchien went back and laid down among the clothes that have been laid out. There's some almost resigned return to role playing. And somewhat more straightforward. She's being rewarded perhaps for playing the role properly. The man is approaching. And here we get a sort of a Hollywood glamour shot. She has lipstick on, which she hasn't the entire movie. So it seems that his touch almost turns her into a pin-up, into a glamorized cosmetic ad. And there's a real emphasis on his gaze. But the poppy's turned into a knife, and then her eyes look over to see it. So it's sudden reversion to Maya 4. And she seems to shatter him, and in shattering him, somehow breaks through the wall to the ocean, to an image of freedom, rejecting her role as the object of his gaze, and in the process of rejecting, getting her own gaze returned to her. That in fact she's not stuck in a house. She's in the open air by the ocean. Because then you have the ocean shot with the shattered mirror on the sand. And then he's striding rather confidently up the steps. The poppy's there. He's got a key. This is identical to the shot of the first Maya, and one gets the feeling that the first Maya is the only Maya that this man knows, and the other three Mayas are trapped inside that Maya. But we just, in that last scene, we just saw that she had shattered and torn down the wall of the domestic space. Until we get the newspapers, but he's starting to look a little concerned. because there's also a shattered mirror, and there's a sharp piece of mirror in her hand, and she's in. This seems to be Maya 1 in the chair, and she's covered in seaweed and kelp. So there's a sense that she has been dragged up from the ocean, and this is where you're going to have to. You've got 15 seconds left in the movie. What happened? This woman seems dead. She seems to have been killed, or was she killed by Maya 4? Was she killed by the man? The one thing that seems clear is that this Maya 1 is dead. Now, my own reading, which I can't prove any more than other people can prove theirs entirely, is in using Esther Greenwood and other things I've read, I think that a version, Maya killed a version of herself. And since it's the only version that this man ever knew, it's the only version he's going to find. So in his eyes, his partner, I don't know, his girlfriend, his wife, has committed suicide. But also she may have just left, and he can't really understand. He can't figure out what in her would have left, because he didn't see her as anything more than the extension of his own desire for how she occupied the domestic space. So it would make sense that all that would be left behind for him to see would be the corpse of his wife. But from the point of view of the Mayas, it took 4 Mayas for her to leave this space, but it finally gets accomplished. And you see a little bit of blood, so it's pretty clear that this, and that's it. All right. Well, I hope you're not, certain that I've proved beyond doubt that I'm out of my mind to teach you these movies, but I think they're so important. You'll never see them on your own, although now maybe you'll remember them. They do seem a way for me, admittedly, impressionistically, to return us to the dominant themes of A11 and to further explore the implications of vertigo, and frankly of every piece we've done in this class. So now I just turn it over to you for this Wednesday. I'll be here at 11 to talk about certainly these films, Vertigo, and we will have another class after that to do further summary. But I'm not going to introduce. I mean, I may introduce something short or an ad or something, but nothing substantial, and I'm not going to record an official lecture for that. So I'm going to stop now, and at least I showed you something different. You may be expecting the unexpected from me by now, but take care of yourselves, and I'll see you on Wednesday.